crusher's not able to segregate. I mean, we wouldn't have so many contamination problems if they could. But it sends a terrible signal. I mean, I get so many calls from producers asking me, what's going on up there? Why are they doing this to us? And I'm like, it's not everybody. It's not everybody. It's just. Hi there.
Hi, Doctor. I want to show you this from Illinois. Yes, yeah, good to see you.
Yes, sir. It's on this.
Well, I think for a little while.
I don't know your line of thinking. I'm not sure where it comes from. Doing well. Vacations more than anything.
This hearing of the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, entitled A 2022 Review of the Farm Bill,
Economic Perspectives on Title I Commodities and Title XI Crop Insurance will come to order. I want to say welcome and thank you for joining today's hearing. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. I'm pleased to chair this hearing as producers around the country are in different stages of the growing season and dealing with varying weather conditions. Winter wheat farmers in the South are starting harvest, with many dealing with historic drought conditions. At the same time, corn, soybean, oilseed, and sugar beet growers further to the north are still trying to get their crops in amid widespread flooding. Since the 2018 Farm Bill was written, farmers have experienced the economic impacts of a trade war with China, marketing and supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic, historic weather events, and now extreme volatility in commodity and input markets caused in part by Putin's unjustified and unprovoked war in Ukraine. In particular, the most consistent issue I hear from farmers and stakeholders back home in Illinois is the price and availability of fertilizer, not only for their production this year, but also what it could mean for next year's crop as well. All of these conditions have had implications for how our Farm Bill programs have been functioning. And our intent with today's hearing is to gather input from this panel of experts on what these conditions have meant for how our commodity programs have worked as a safety net and the role that the federal crop insurance program has played in helping producers manage risk. During the past year and a half, this subcommittee has been focused on understanding the situation on the ground and the needs of our producers. We held a hearing on the efficacy of the farm safety net almost a year ago and heard important testimony from producers, a crop insurance agent, and an ag economist, and it is clear the situation is much different today than it was at that time. And earlier this year, we heard from Undersecretary Robert Bonney about the state of our Farm Bill programs. Today, we have the privilege to hear from a distinguished panel of agricultural economists on the state of play, and I look forward to your testimony. I'd now like to welcome the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott, for any opening remarks he would like to give.
Thank you, Chairman Bustos, and thank you to the economists that are joining us today to share their perspectives on the state of the ag economy and the performance of the farm safety net and risk management tools in the Farm Bill. I would be remiss if I didn't say that the ag economy is the rural economy. And for those of us who live in rural America who do not farm, we recognize the impact of agriculture on our daily lives. Between weather, global events, skyrocketing inflation, and regulatory uncertainty, farmers and ranchers today are struggling to make sound business decisions in the face of extreme uncertainty. The provisions we established in the 2018 Farm Bill were meant to help farmers manage some of that risk. Today, I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses about how those policies are working. While all Americans are dealing with the impact of high and rising inflation, I would argue that the farm sector of the economy is the one that's most vulnerable to these impacts. As JFK said, they buy everything at retail, sell it at wholesale, and pay the freight both ways. Many ag commodities are fetching high prices, but the cost of inputs continue to skyrocket. Transportation is more expensive, and labor is increasingly hard to find. Any softening of crop prices could spell disaster for the rural economy because production costs continue to rise. I'm extremely frustrated with an administration who's absolutely tone deaf to what is happening on the farm. Senior officials suggest that the remedy for high gas prices is for more Americans to drive electric vehicles, or the USDA's most recent announcement in which they seek to transform the food system, one rooftop garden at a time. This administration has clearly shown their lack of regard for the full-time farmers and ranchers that produce our food. And instead of going on Jimmy Kimmel, perhaps the administration could remove the excise tax on diesel fuel and reduce the cost of farming. There are certainly many factors that contribute to the skyrocketing production cost, but it's undeniable that many of these wounds are self-inflicted by our current political leadership. Yesterday, I spoke to a farmer that I represent. He told me that during the 2019 planting season, he was paying $2.71 a gallon for truck fuel, $2.08 a gallon for tractor fuel. His quote yesterday was $5.55 a gallon for truck fuel and $5.21 a gallon for tractor fuel. Those increases of 104.8% and 150.5% respectively would be higher had the governor of the state of Georgia not removed Georgia's tax on diesel. Crop protection tools that farmers rely on are under assault from the left-wing enviro activists, yet the Solicitor General filed a brief in the Ninth Circuit that fundamentally undermines EPA's preemptive authority over crop protection tools. The list goes on of the damage this administration is doing. I'm interested in the testimony of our witnesses today, particularly how it relates to the impact inflation and production costs will have on farmers, ranchers, and if our current safety net is inadequate. But instead of only looking for solutions via more federal assistance, the subcommittee also needs to pay attention to policies and actions that increase the cost of growing food and work to remedy that. Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this hearing. Thank you to the witnesses before us today. I yield back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Scott. I will now recognize the ranking member of our full committee, Mr. Thompson, for any opening statements he'd like to make.
Chairwoman, thank you so much. Much appreciation to you, Chairwoman Bustos, Ranking Member Scott, and the four witnesses with us today. This hearing is happening at a critical time as it relates to the work of the Agriculture Committee. Farmers are combating incredible challenges as they need to feed, clothe, and fuel this great nation and the world. The headlines of the recent article in the Wall Street Journal tell the story well, such as, quote, farmers feel the squeeze of inflation, end quote, or, quote, farms are failing as fertilizer prices drive up cost of food, end quote. And another headline, quote, farmers are racing against poor weather to plant crops, end quote. That is just scratching the surface of the challenges that our producers face. Additionally, 2 weeks ago, the Congressional Budget Office released the updated baseline for USDA mandatory programs, which paints a challenging picture for this committee as we look to reauthorize the Farm Bill and make key improvements along the way. The critical Title I support programs, ARC and PLC, have spent about $5 billion, or 24% less than expected in the 4 years after passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. And the 10-year expected cost of these programs is down nearly $7 billion. Now, because of their counter-cyclical design, these programs spending less would typically be a good sign, but as it indicates commodity prices are higher. However, this is not translating to drastically higher farm profitability because the inputs required to produce crops have skyrocketed as well. In just 1 year, the cost per acre for nitrogen fertilizer is up 130%. Farm diesel is up 110%, and according to USDA's Economic Research Service, farm production expenses are expected to jump by over $20 billion in 2022. All these factors are ones that we must weigh as we begin to consider necessary reforms to Farm Bill programs. There's no better way to understand the current market dynamics and inform process than to hear from the agriculture economists with us today. Over the past 2 decades, each Farm Bill has taken a unique route to enactment, whether it was a 2002 Farm Bill that was done early, the 2008 Farm Bill that was vetoed and overridden not once but twice, the 2014 Farm Bill that took 2 years of extensions to get across the finish line, or the 2018 Farm Bill that first failed on the House floor but was ultimately enacted with record support in both chambers in the year that it was introduced. Each one is different, yet the one constant is the preparation, diligent work, and input from stakeholders that ultimately led to success. So again, I want to thank the chair and the ranking member of the subcommittee for convening this hearing, and I eagerly look forward to hearing from our witnesses, farmers, ranchers, and foresters are in the fight to produce safe, abundant, and affordable products that we all rely upon, and they deserve the best possible policies to aid in that fight. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that they know that we are right there with them, and despite all the challenges, we will have their backs in the 2023 Farm Bill. Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, and thank you for being so good about attending our subcommittee hearings. You've been wonderful on that. The chair would request that any other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. We're pleased to welcome our 4 distinguished expert witnesses to our hearing today. We have 2 in person here in Washington, D.C. in our hearing room. We have 2 who will be virtual. We are going to start with some introductions. I'm going to introduce a couple, and then we've got a couple of our members up here who will introduce a couple of our folks who are witnesses today, and then you will have your opening statements after we start with our introductions. So our first witness is from my home state of Illinois, Dr. Joseph Jansen, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And he contributes to Farm Doc Daily, an online resource for farmers across the country. So to introduce our second witness, I will yield to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Congresswoman Angie Craig.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Bustos. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce Mr. Robert Craven to the subcommittee. Mr. Craven is the Associate Director of the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota, where he also serves as an extension economist. In his leadership role with the Center for Farm Financial Management, Mr. Craven has led the development of FinPac, which is a nationally recognized ag credit analysis software. His work to help producers better benchmark their performance and make informed and strategic economic decisions has made a positive impact for thousands of family farmers. He has taught for more than 450 workshops designed to help farmers maximize their financial decisions and effectiveness, including farm management and marketing, and he's spoken at dozens of ag conferences and seminars. In addition to all of this work, Mr. Craven is still involved in his family's farming operation in southwestern Minnesota. Mr. Craven, your work to help family farmers really maximizes the effectiveness of commodity programs and crop insurance, and is incredibly important and impactful. We're lucky to have you in Minnesota.
Thank you, Congresswoman Craig. To introduce our third witness today, I am pleased to yield to the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Rick Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to introduce Dr. Ron Rainey, who is Assistant Vice President of the Division of Agriculture and Center Director for the Southern Risk Management Education Center. Dr. Rainey has decades of experience as an extension agricultural economist with the University of Arkansas, and I appreciate his work for our state and appreciate him being here with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Our fourth and final witness today is Dr. Joe Outlaw, who's with us here in person, who is a professor and extension economist and who is the co-director of the Agriculture Food Policy Center at Texas A&M. So welcome again to all four of our witnesses today. We will now proceed with your testimony. You will each have 5 minutes. The timer should be visible to you, and we'll count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. If you can honor that as best as possible, that would be great. Dr. Jansen, please begin when you are ready.
Chairwoman Bustos, Ranking Member Scott, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Joe Jansen. I'm an assistant professor of agricultural and consumer economics at the University of Illinois, where I'm a contributor to the Farm Doc project. Farm Doc is a leading extension platform providing U.S. agriculture with integrated information and analysis to improve farm business decision-making and policy outcomes. As a member of the Farm Doc team, I've published peer-reviewed academic research and outreach articles for industry and policymakers on commodity market analysis and the interplay between commodity prices and agricultural policy. My testimony focuses on changes in commodity prices related to the ongoing war in Ukraine and their implications for current and future U.S. farm policy, specifically the relationship between price levels and Title I farm programs. These programs are an important component of the farm safety net, generally used to address the economic consequences of low commodity prices for U.S. farmers over periods longer than the single production cycle covered by crop insurance. I want to highlight the following. Our expectations for commodity prices are an important determinant of the policymaking process, setting the parameters of these safety net programs. We are currently in a period of high commodity prices. Since the beginning of 2022, corn, wheat, and soybean prices have increased by 20 to 50% from already elevated levels. Supply disruptions due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine are a major cause of the price change, but inventory reductions over the past 4 years, poor growing season weather in the United States, South America, and elsewhere around the world, and strong demand from China and other importers are important contributing factors. Current market price structure suggests elevated corn, wheat, and soybean prices for the duration of the marketing period for the 2022 crop, and lower but still historically elevated prices for the 2023 crop. U.S. farmers do face challenges related to adverse weather and rising costs. However, higher prices for corn, soybeans, and wheat for farmers of those crops are expected to improve profitability for U.S. farmers relative to 2021. For example, University of Illinois crop budgets show expected revenue increases larger than concurrent growth in farm input prices for fertilizer and energy that are also high, in part as a consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What makes this input situation so difficult is more so the uncertainty around supply chains and the ability to procure the fertilizer and other inputs necessary to produce the food that we all eat. Recent policy proposals have included the use of Title I commodity programs to incentivize U.S. farmers to fill the gap in global supply related to the war in Ukraine. This is a difficult challenge because Ukraine and Russia are low-cost producers of corn, wheat, and other commodities. Commodity supply from Ukraine and Russia can only really be replaced with higher cost production from other parts of the world. Experiences under the 2018 Farm Bill do offer some lessons for policy responses to this situation. Since 2018, Title I commodity programs have played a diminished role in the farm safety net relative to ad hoc programs intended to compensate farmers for specific price declines related to the US-China trade war and the coronavirus pandemic that did not trigger payments under standing programs. This experience suggests there are a number of trade-offs among objectives for US farm policy, including decoupling program payments from production to avoid distorting market price incentives, targeting program payments to specific realized losses, and delivering timely program payments. For example, a rapid, timely response to an observed price change is likely to impair targeting of that program to specific losses. For example, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program in 2020 compensated farmers for price declines between January and July of that year that proved temporary. Targeting programs to encourage U.S. production when prices are historically high runs counter to the principle that U.S. farm programs should be decoupled from production, a principle that was maintained throughout that series of ad hoc programs developed by USDA. Using Title I or similar programs to increase supply response would also create long-term budget liabilities, and their impact on production and thus on the global market situation may be small. In summary, there's a limited role for farm policy, especially Title I commodity programs, to address the consequences of the war in Ukraine. Current and expected future prices are providing U.S. farmers with a strong incentive to meet this challenge, and they are making every effort to do so, as we've seen, in spite of the ongoing weather and other challenges that they face. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jansen. Mr. Craven, please begin when you're ready.
Chairwoman Busto, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm Bob Craven, Extension Economist and Associate Director of the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota. The center has a long history of providing decision support tools and training to agricultural producers and the professionals that support them. One of our major efforts is farm benchmarking to help producers better understand their financial performance and make better decisions. We collaborate with farm business management programs in over 20 states to provide tools and educational support. These programs work with individual producers on their record keeping, planning, and analysis of those records. Currently, the analyses from producers in 12 of these states are then loaded anonymously into the FinBin database, the largest public searchable database of farm financial information in the U.S. There are currently over 3,300 producers in the database with data that spans over 20 years. The FinBin data is the basis for my presentation today. I'm going to go ahead and share some charts on the screen so that you can look along with me on those. Chart 1 shows median net farm income over the past 26 years. Net farm income is the amount available for family living, taxes, and net worth growth. 2013 through 2019 represented a period of low net farm income. The average rate of return on assets during that period was 2.5%. Under 4% is considered weak. 2020 and 21 saw a significant improvement in profitability. The median income in 2021 was just over $166,000, up from just under $109,000 in 2020. ROA in 2021 was much improved at 11%. Chart 2 provides the net farm income by different farm types. As you can see, hog farms had an excellent year in 2021. Crop and beef farms also had increased profitability over the past 2 years, but the beef farms in our database always struggle with profitability. Dairy farms did well in 2020, but their net income declined slightly in 2021. Chart 3 shows working capital as a percent of gross income. This is a measure of the liquidity or the ability of the business to meet short-term financial obligations. It's the first line of financial defense in low-income years. Over 30% would be considered a strong position. Crop, beef, and hog farms all improved their liquidity position substantially over the past 2 years. Dairy farms showed only a slight increase in 2021, but they're in a much stronger position than they were at the end of 2018. Chart 4 shows average net farm income displayed in the blue bars. We're using averages here. Median values were provided in the charts above. Government payments are displayed by the red line. We have included PPP loan forgiveness in government payments, which had a significant impact on the payments for 2020 and 21. From 2007 to 2013, there was little variability in government payments. Many of the payments at that time were from direct programs. ARC and PLC were first introduced in 2014. 2015 through 2019 were very low income years for Midwest farmers. So in those years, government payments made up a substantial percent of net farm income. This chart shows that 2020 would have also been a low income year had it not been for COVID-related ad hoc payments. Chart 5 shows the breakdown of government payments by type. The maroon portion of the bars represent ARC and PLC payments. The purple bar represents what I've termed ad hoc government payments. In 2020 and 21, this includes PPP loan forgiveness. Certainly ad hoc payments and PPP were a significant portion of support from 2018 through 2021. The low ARC PLC payments in 21 reflect good yields and commodity prices in 2020. The final chart 6 shows net farm income and government payments by different farm size. The lower axis is gross farm income in thousands. Government payments increase as farm size increase, but as a proportion of net farm income, it decreases. In 2021, for a farm that grossed $100,000 to $250,000, government payments comprised 31% of net farm income. For operations grossing over $2 million, it was only 20%. In conclusion, our data illustrate that traditional commodity programs have not provided the major part of the support to react to the shocks that have hit commodity agriculture in recent years. Ad hoc programs filled in the gaps. In recent years, both Title I commodity and ad hoc programs have been an important safety net for agriculture producers. If you have additional questions about the data in FinBin, don't hesitate to reach out for me. Thanks for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Craven. Dr. Rainey, please begin when you're ready.
Madam Chairwoman and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present here today. My name is Ron Rainey, and I'm humbled to provide input into this important deliberative process. I have almost 3 decades of experience working primarily as an extension agricultural economist across the food value chain with the University of Arkansas, our state's flagship land-grant university. I currently serve as Assistant Vice President of the Division of Agriculture and Center Director for the Southern Risk Management Education Center. Farmers across the South continue to adapt to the challenging agricultural environment made worse by the pandemic, current microeconomic trends, climate variability, and disrupted supply chains. The growing challenges of inflationary pressure and supply chain issues will push 2022 net farm incomes lower as a result of sharply higher costs of inputs, particularly fertilizer and fuel. Increasingly, adverse weather events are creating additional hurdles for farms that challenge farm viability. Many of our specialty crop producers have limited crop insurance options, and the added cost sometimes results in minimum risk reducing strategies being implemented on their farms. The number of insurance products that have been made available has expanded in recent years. For example, whole farm revenue, dairy margin, forage, to name a few, but still gaps in coverage remain. For example, the poultry sector, which is the largest single agriculture industry in many southern states, is dominated by contract production. Yet contract growers have virtually no access to insurance products. Even where newer insurance product offerings are available, a lack of understanding on the functionality of a number of these more specialized products is a persistent problem that hampers use of crop insurance. The Ag Risk Protection Act of 2000 authorized the Secretary of USDA to carry out the program, the Partnerships for Risk Management Education. Under this authority, NEPA partners with 4 regional extension risk management centers to carry out a nationally competitive grants program, Extension Risk Management Education. The Southern Risk Management Center at the University of Arkansas has been part of the ERME program since 2009, serving the Southern region. SRMEC's goal is to empower producers to manage risks and to understand and manage their ability to understand those risks and increase profitability of Southern agriculture by delivering programs designed to change risk management behavior among key producer populations. The center annually manages $2 million in competitive grants that seek to empower producers to manage risk on their individual operations through educational offerings, primarily to land-grant institutions, those faculty, and community-based organizations as well. We offer 2 grant programs. One focuses on a full range of risk management activities and tools, and the other seeks to enhance the use and understanding of federal crop insurance. The ERME program routinely collaborates with Risk Management Agency to promote RMA resources and to engage with its regional offices on ways to engage and support our farmers and ranchers. Both programs collaborated to jointly develop and distribute a primer, Introduction to Risk Management Education, which is a publication that details a consistent approach that across the 5 risk areas that we address: production, marketing, finance, legal, and human. The Southern Center also has ongoing conversations with crop insurance industry, individual companies, National Crop Insurance Services, and the Crop Insurance Professional Association on ways to collaborate on company agent trainings, as well as on ways to engage with our farmers and our ranchers. SRMEC is working with partners across the region to offer continuing education credits to enhance crop insurance industry stakeholder understanding of emerging issues in agriculture and best management practices for engaging diverse producer groups. The Census of Agriculture reveals that most socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers on average operate relatively smaller size farms, thereby leveraging smaller operating loans to produce their crops each year. It should be noted that USDA program historical equity and access issues have played a significant role in limiting the opportunities for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers to gain economies of scale, increasing their farm size, and investing in an innovative or new machinery. The lack of opportunity to scale up results in lower productivity and relatively higher input costs on average. Even when socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers participate in USDA programs, they receive a disproportionately lower level of federal support in terms of funds to reinvest in their farms. The cumulative impact of these lower support levels over an extended period of time results in real differences in terms of size of operation, equipment facilities, and seriously compromising the viability of socially disadvantaged owned operations. Another issue that continues to plague socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers is real and perceived trust issues resulting from current and past experiences and ongoing confrontations. For example, there are a number of producers who refuse to enter a USD office even in 2022 because of fear based on past experiences of disparate treatment, of the ability or probability of losing their land or being foreclosed on a loan under what they would feel would be less than fair conditions. Therefore, the ability to build and restore trust in relationships is a critical hurdle to effectively reach marginalized producers and their communities with USDA programs and resources. To carry out our programs,
Dr. Rainey?
Yes, ma'am.
Your time's expired. Can you wrap it up like in a couple seconds?
Yes, ma'am. So we annually collaborate to carry out our programs with both 1862 institutions, 1890 institutions, with some of their outreach specialists. And I just want to close by highlighting a program that we recently launched in partnership with Dr. Outlaw and his center to launch Southern Ag Today, which is a collaboration to do a daily news analysis which focuses on Southern agriculture and its producers.
All right, very good. Thank you, Dr. Rainey. Appreciate that. Dr. Outlaw, please begin when you're ready.
Chairwoman Bustos, Ranking Member Scott, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Agricultural and Food Policy Center at Texas A&M University as you focus on opportunities to enhance Title I and 11 programs. As many of you know, the primary focus of AFPC has been to analyze the likely consequences of policy changes at the farm level with our one-of-a-kind data set of information that we collect from commercial farmers and ranchers located across the United States. Working closely with 675 commercial producers has provided our group with a unique perspective on agricultural policy. Currently, we maintain the information to describe and simulate 94 representative crop and livestock operations in 30 states. In order to provide perspective on Titles 1 and 11, I wanted to briefly summarize a recent report that looks at farm profitability in 2021 relative to 2022 relative to 21 for our 64 representative crop farms in the face of higher input and output prices. For this report, we asked our panel members to provide their cost per acre for each of those years. While some producers were able to benefit by locking in input prices early in 2021 for this year's crop, most indicated very little ability to do so. The news is full of stories about inflation that is averaging 8.5% so far this year for the average American. The lowest year-over-year inflation farmers are seeing is twice that on seed, with most commodity categories many times higher. The following are highlights of the analysis that are relevant for today's hearing. Net cash farm income in 2021 included a significant amount of ad hoc assistance. Absent another infusion in 2022, we estimate that significant increases in input prices will result in a decline in net cash farm income in 2022 relative to 21. However, despite the income reduction from 21, most crops will likely still result in positive net cash farm income for the representative crop farms. The noticeable outlier is rice. 2/3 of rice farms are facing losses in 2022. Having worked with farmers over the last 30 years, I want to make sure you understand we are talking about historic amounts of capital that farmers are putting at risk. Throughout my career, I have referred to the programs in Title I and Title XI as the three-legged stool that serves as a safety net for U.S. producers. Agriculture Risk Coverage, ARC, and Price Loss Coverage, PLC, and the non-recourse commodity loan program serve as two of the legs, while the federal crop insurance program serves as the third leg. Price loss coverage was established in the 2014 Farm Bill using the cost of production as a basis for setting the level of protection for each covered commodity through reference prices. PLC rates worked fine while inflation was fairly low. However, the reference prices are in dire need of increases to remain relevant. Producers' costs have increased substantially, and the current reference prices are not providing a relevant amount of protection. Agriculture risk coverage was also established in the 2014 Farm Bill. ARC uses a 5-year moving average of historic prices and yields to establish a benchmark that is used to determine the level of protection producers receive. While good when coming off of relatively high prices, ARC proved worthless when prices declined and remained relatively flat. Since ARC has a reference price embedded in the calculations, raising reference prices will make ARC attractive as a revenue protection safety net alternative. Assuming these two alternatives are used going forward, instead of forcing producers to pick the tool, ARC or PLC, they want, I would suggest allowing them to receive the benefits of whichever is higher in a given year. This would cost nothing more than if producers have chosen wisely. Historically high input costs have also highlighted the shortcomings of basing safety nets on prices and/or gross incomes alone. This may present an opportunity to explore adding margin coverage. However, I would urge you to proceed with caution. Dairy offers an instructive example. Dairy margin coverage was added in the 2014 Farm Bill, but the initial version was a flop that has taken years and a lot of money to improve. The non-recourse loan marketing program works as it was designed. The rates have largely remained unchanged over the past 30 years, losing ground to inflation. The rates need to be raised to increase the amount of the crop that is being protected, which will cost money. Federal crop insurance is an enormously successful public-private partnership that stands today as a primary safety net tool for U.S. producers. As I've said many times in front of Congress, do no harm to crop insurance and stop outside interest groups from trying to tie provisions of their pet projects to crop insurance. For example, linking climate change practice adoption to insurance program subsidy levels. While this hearing is about the Farm Bill, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the last 5 years of ad hoc disaster assistance. I believe the upcoming Farm Bill provides an opportunity to help address some of the shortcomings of ad hoc assistance that ad hoc assistance was designed to address. Madam Chairwoman, thank you. This completes my statement.
Thank you, Dr. Outlaw. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will each be recognized for 5 minutes, each in order to allow to get to as many questions as possible. Please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized in order to minimize background noise. For starters, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes and start with our line of questioning. In my question, just so all 4 of you are paying attention, I'd like all 4 of you to address it. And Dr. Johnson, I'm going to ask you to address it first just because you're from my home state of Illinois, all right? So you get that benefit. So here you go. What's an appropriate metric we should be using to evaluate how the safety net should be structured? ARC kicks in when there are relatively significant drops in revenue compared to the previous few years. PLC kicks in when prices drop below a set level. And producers face risk now of tightened margins. How should we think about an appropriate structure of the farm safety net? This is really to help us start laying the foundation for what do we want to consider as we look at the 2023 Farm Bill. Dr. Jansen, we'll start with you.
I think an appropriate measure is, a starting point is the level of price. And looking this is a long-standing debate about whether we should have sort of flexible or fixed parameters. And it's something that I think it would, if Congress wants to step up and say that we know what the long-run level of price is that we would like at which we'd like to fix the safety net, then the PLC reference price is that parameter in current policy and likely to be something similar in policy going forward. So we need to decide what that price is. And it's important to remember that that's the season average price, not the price on one day, but the price over the course of an entire year. And I think it's important to recognize that we have a situation right now where prices are high, but people are worried about price declines. But it's important to sort of wait until those price declines are realized and we understand what net farm income is in a given year before we sort of define whether there's been a realized loss that's worth having some sort of policy intervention to cover.
Very good. Dr. Outlaw, if you can answer the question as well.
I tend to take a little bit different view. I look at the cost of production as basically something that tells me we need to cover a good portion of the cost if we're going to keep people producing in this country. And one of the things that our center has done for various members of Congress over time is look at a lot of different ways at trying to attach escalators to the reference price, for example, that would take into consideration cost increases, and so that producers wouldn't be caught flat whenever prices. What we know is going to happen, Mrs. Chairman, is that the prices are going to decline, but the input prices are going to stay up for a while, and they always do. And that's going to leave people in what we call a cost price squeeze. And so either looking at some sort of margin or building in the ability to ratchet up the reference price with costs is my suggestion.
Thanks, Dr. Outlaw. Dr. Rainey, is there anything that you would have to add to either one of those responses?
Again, I would focus in on the comments made by Dr. Outlaw. I think that the margin, because just focusing on price, you get in the situation we have now where our input costs are increasing and inflationary pressures, and so you're going to have some intense pressure where that safety net will be weakened.
Thanks, Dr. Rainey. And then Mr. Craven, anything else to add?
I would just second Dr. Outlaw's comments. You know, we've looked at cost of production for corn in Minnesota for 2023, and it's $5.18, which is a long ways away from where we currently have our in reference prices.
Okay, very good. Dr. Jansen, I'm going to address my second question to you. Appreciate you sharing your insight on what you shared about commodity prices and the implication of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the current and future farm policy. You talked about how the recent increases in commodity prices are expected to be larger than growth in input costs for corn, soybean, and wheat farmers for the marketing year of the 2022 crop. Coming into this growing season, and with the uncertainty producers have faced over input costs and market prices, can you talk about the sort of considerations that farmers are making in their inputs for this year and looking ahead to next year?
Right. There is, I think, tremendous uncertainty, and the capital required is massive. And those put everyone on sort of a little bit of unstable footing. The question, I think, for this, under the aegis of this committee, is related to, well, what losses have occurred? And as of yet, those losses are not yet realized. We do have a crop insurance program that will step in the situation where production declines occur because of weather or other things beyond the control of the producer. That safety net is in place, and we have to let that safety net play out.
We could talk a lot deeper about this, but with the time expired, I will now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Austin Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Craven, when you put that number up there on the ad hoc assistance, I assume that includes the USDA food box program. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We didn't differentiate, so the ad hoc included PPP loan forgiveness, the WIP programs, CFAP, the QLA payments. So there was a long list of payments that were in that ad hoc category.
Okay. I do, I'll ask staff to do this, but I would like to see that chart without the food box and other things in there, simply because I do know farmers who are literally herring their crops under, and had it not been for the food box program, where we did some unusual things, where we actually purchased the commodities from the farmers and delivered them to the American citizens, I can tell you we would have had a lot of hungry people inside this country. And I do think that as this committee pushes forward, if we deal with the crop insurance system in an appropriate manner, then there, for the majority of the time, should be less ad hoc assistance, including disaster assistance, if we get the crop insurance program correct. Would you agree with that as economist? That if crop insurance is handled properly, that we would need less ad hoc assistance?
I would agree with that. And, you know, I didn't talk much about crop insurance in my presentation, but
That's fine.
you know, certainly I think that's a basis that almost all producers rely on, at least commodity producers, in terms of the first support net that we have out there.
Let me mention, we've talked some about Russia and production cost. One of my farmers sent me these numbers. In May of 19, he was paying $248 a ton for nitrogen. In May of 22, just a few days ago, he paid $682 a ton. I think as we talk about Russia and even Belarus, we have to remember that Russia's the #1 producer of nitrogen, and Russia and Belarus are number 2 and number 3, I believe, in potash production, which we all depend on for the yields that we have in this country. And so as we've touched on higher operating revenue in 22, we have to have a long-term outlook for production agriculture inside this country. And so the 22 forecasts are based on expected yields. Inputs have gone up, particularly fertilizer and diesel. I know many farmers are looking to save costs by applying less nutrients. We had an issue where Union Pacific curtailed fertilizer shipments. Now, I understand that they undid that, but certainly if you don't have the ability to get the nutrients in the crop in a timely manner, then that impacts yield. If farmers are not able to get the nutrients on their crops, if this prevalent behavior results in lower yields, how concerned are you that actual operator returns would be significantly less than currently anticipated? Dr. Outlaw?
I'm very concerned. Aside from price, weather concerns around the country are still making it where some crops are not even in yet. So the producers that we deal with reach out to me on a daily basis talking about the fact of individual instances of not being able to get different inputs, whether it be chemicals or nutrients. And this is a real challenge, and it's going to prove to be a challenge. Farming is an extremely difficult thing to do, even though they make it look easy at times. And if we have any kind of weather blip, we're going to not have the yields. And as was stated earlier, we're going to have even worse price situation than when we thought.
Well, I think navigating over the next year is going to be difficult for our farm families, but we have to have a crop insurance system that's going to allow them to navigate over the next decade. I don't want my country to become dependent on foreign sources of food, and I don't know any American that does. I would suggest that none of you have spoken about the removal of some of the products. I mean, glyphosate, dicamba. As you remove those products from the farmers' tools, what is that going to do to the yields in this country? Dr. Outlaw?
They're going to go down.
I think that's important for Americans to understand, that as liberals use the courts and other things to remove the products that we need as farmers to produce the food supply for America and the rest of the world, that as our yields go down, the prices for Americans at the grocery stores is going to go up. With that, Madam Chair, I'll yield.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Scott. I will now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. O'Halloran.
Thank you, Madam Chair, ranking member, for this meeting today. It's important for our getting prepared for the Farm Bill. I've been interested in hearing what I have so far this morning, and it's my belief that we have to find a way for better flexibility, innovation, and timely action. Congress and government in the whole have to start to understand that these dynamic markets that we're seeing now are not going to go away anytime soon, and we have to be prepared for that in the long run. And that means being on our feet and ready to move instantly in many cases as the world changes and climate changes. Arizona has experienced the worst drought the region has seen in 1,200 years, and it's going to get worse. The arid climate and skyrocketing temperatures have only worsened since we passed the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's essential we update critical safety net programs to reflect these changes. Nationally, producers are contending with high fuel and fertilizer costs. On top of this, producers are facing extreme drought conditions, run the risk of ultimately not being able to grow their crop because of soaring temperatures and wildfires. In fact, my last time in the district last week, as I went around it, it's probably, I've lived in Arizona now for 28 years. I've never seen conditions like this, and with no relief in sight, whether it's the Southwest or the South or anywhere else in our great country and the world, we have something that has to be overcome, and we can't do it by half measures. So, Dr. Outlaw, because of more frequent and severe weather events, Congress authorized an ad hoc disaster assistance to supplement crop insurance and support uninsured producers. And how are producers in drought-stricken areas faring in the current state of the farm economy?
Well, specifically due to the program you mentioned, y'all had passed WIP and then WIP Plus, and then the new program that recently was rolled out is going to provide a lot of protection, which will help producers when they have had a loss, and it will help cover a portion of the deductible that they don't get paid on. So that's been a very important aspect of the programs.
Thank you. And another question, and are crop insurance and disaster programs adequately supporting farm incomes affected by drought?
Well, I'd have to say they are, because crop insurance is very strong, and the way it works, most of the commodities, the price that establishes the amount of coverage is adjusted off of the futures market, which on an annual basis is really good. When prices are moving up, we have a lot of protection. So producers have a lot of protection through their products right now. And then with the new ad hoc disaster program that's going to pay part of the deductible back because of some sort of loss, one of those being drought, then they're going to be made less. They're going to be made more whole is the way to say it. They're not going to be made whole, but more whole.
Thank you, Doctor. And Dr. Rainey, Arizona's 1st Congressional District is home to many rural and tribal communities that you know about, and many may not always have easy access to risk management programs. Could you please talk about the work the Southern Risk Management Education Center does to help underserved producers manage their risk and the type of outreach the center does to these communities?
Yeah, so we provide grants to actually hold face-to-face outreach trainings to help explain those different insurance products to the various groups, farmers and ranchers that are interested in them. We try to make connections with risk management agencies so that there's an additional agency there to help make the connections to some of the companies and the agents to talk about the different products and services that are available. So we're there as an educational endeavor to try to make those connections, to make that process more transparent, so that our farmers can not only understand the environment that they're facing, but understand the specific tools or what may be best for them to use, what insurance product would work best for them.
Thank you, Dr. Rainey, and I see my time is almost up, and I yield. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. I now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the ranking member of our full committee, Mr. Thompson.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. First question, is, Dr. Outlaw, in your testimony, you mentioned the potential for Congress to explore a margin program. That's a concept that I've been interested in, as by and large dairy producers in Pennsylvania have been pleased with how the dairy margin coverage has functioned after we made key improvements in 2018 Farm Bill. Could you perhaps explain a bit further on how something like that might work for row crops? In particular, what would be the benefits of a margin-based program versus a support based on price alone?
Well, clearly, the benefit is that it would take into consideration both the cost side and the revenue side, where we're largely have protected the revenue side in this country. That would be one of those things that I would hope that you would ask our center to look into for you, or for this committee, and so that, because it would, on the surface, it sounds relatively easy. I know that those of you that were involved in the dairy know that it took a little bit of time to get it to where that worked well. Yeah. And what I would say is maybe you would want to consider doing a pilot for a certain commodity, or because while it was very simple to among us economists, we would come up with, well, on the cost side, fertilizer, clearly fuel and labor, and there's a whole lot of things that would matter for a certain set of crops that might not matter as much for another set of crops. So we'd have to be really careful to make sure that we did it balanced. But it would be worth looking at for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of variables in farming, right? Soil types, climate, moisture, but the bottom line is that agriculture is a business. And at the end of the day, it's not what you bring in, it's the margin you're left with. And I have tremendous concerns with where we're heading right now. On that note, while prices for most commodities are at high levels, and some paint a rosy picture for agriculture, I think that's mostly by folks who really don't understand that farming is a business, and at the end of the day, it's the margin you're left with, if any. I'm not optimistic about this. Net farm income projections are based on an expectation of average yields, which is not a given. Additionally, it will only take some softening of prices before producers may be underwater. As you've well stated, commodity prices can drop overnight, but input costs, once they're up there, it's difficult to see them lower. Would any of our witnesses care to speculate, I'm asking for your crystal balls now, I guess, about how long we might expect bullish commodity markets, and when prices do begin to moderate, how long would you expect it to take for production expenses to fall? Or is this the new normal? And I know it's speculation.
I think we can say from the price signals that we see right now, prices will remain elevated for the 2023 crop. The new 2023 prices for delivery for that harvest are still well above historic levels that say wouldn't cause the PLC program to kick in, for example. Now, probably the biggest factor is obviously the war in Ukraine. Some resolution to that conflict will lower commodity prices both on the output side and the input side. But I think you're right that there's significant concern that even on the input side, there's a host of issues around the world that would leave input prices elevated, and that's a concern for U.S. agriculture going forward.
Yeah, just the clearing of those mines in the port of Odessa to allow those grain elevators to be offloaded so they can be refilled. Any of the other witnesses, any thoughts or comments on that particular question?
I guess as we look back, Congressman, at 2012 and how many years it took for costs to come back in line with lower prices, it was a 4 or 5 year process before things got lined back up again. So it takes a long time to get those back down, as Joe pointed out earlier.
Yeah. Now I'm going to tee this up and would love to follow up individually with you just because of all the time that I have remaining. I've been hearing a lot about, and I want to look at the economic impact on commodity prices, but it's a total curveball. It has to do with solar fields on fertile farmlands. And And this, I don't know, I think some of our other members of the committee are hearing about this as well. It's, policies have impact, right? And recently hearing a lot of discussion and concern that government policy is incentivizing placement of solar farms on fertile farm, not marginal, but fertile farm land, driving up the competition for leasing acreage. And that's really important for our young and beginning farmers. And so I'd love to follow up with you, any thoughts you might have in writing or in person, if this is or could be a significant input cost variable going forward, just the cost of acreage. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thompson. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Scott for hosting this important hearing. I'd like to welcome all of the panel to the committee because it's a very important area. Federal crop insurance is a hugely successful public-private partnership that today stands as the primary safety net for the U.S. producers. However, in your testimony, Mr. Rainey, you discussed the lack of understanding among insurance companies on available products and their lack of engagement with certain products. What do you believe, Mr. Rainey, Congress can do to bridge the gap and encourage insurance companies and their agents to diversify their portfolio and continue to outreach to social disadvantaged farmers?
I do think that that is a pervasive issue, and sometimes I think it's just some of the economics of it. Because so if I'm an insurance agent and company and I'm in a high intense row crop commercial area, if I got a portfolio full of large scale commercial row crop producers, I may not even take the time to learn about whole farm revenue, which is what our specialty crop, what some of our small growers would be interested in. So any way to enhance that training or understanding, because at the end of the day, some of those agents and companies will tell those farmers, oh, we don't offer that, or they would try to send them to someone else. And some of it's just a profit motive. So as you explore that engagement, I think there's some education with the companies and agents on, to me, it's an entrepreneurship opportunity to diversify their staff to serve this need and really look at what is an economic benefit to those companies and those agents to serve those underserved areas, if you will. I think that would be a first step, is to really have a real discussion with the companies and agents about, or understanding on the areas that they're not serving. Because I think there's a lack of understanding of crops outside of their traditional audience that they've historically served.
Okay, thank you. And I would just like to say my district is no stranger to the worsening and more frequent severe weather events and the importance of ad hoc disaster assistance for producers. The next question would be, this question is for all the panel. As we enter into negotiation of the Farm Bill, should Congress consider a permanent disaster program? How do you believe a permanent assistance could build upon existing Title I and Title XI programs? This is for the panel.
I'll take the first shot. Thank you. In general, the crop insurance industry and the products that are available are sufficient. What we have found over time is that natural disasters don't worry about what policy you bought. And so it has been a case where there has been added help provided to cover a portion of the deductible area. It is certainly within logical thinking to think that if we've done this 5 years in a row, that likely we're going to continue to do this. There's going to be natural disasters, and it would be helpful if there was a plan in place or a set of rules in place of exactly how it was going to work, so that producers would understand what kind of help they might get if this happened, and not leave it to chance or whether you get something passed.
Anyone else like to respond?
The issue in developing a standing disaster assistance program is always how to define what constitutes a disaster and when will the government step in and when will they not. And that's why these programs have been ad hoc. And the crop insurance program does a good job of defining the types of losses that'll be covered. And so a standing disaster assistance program looks a lot like insurance, but covering the things that we didn't know about the future.
I tell you what, in reclaiming my time, Dr. Outlaw, you mentioned in your written testimony that producers should not be forced to choose between agricultural risk coverage and price loss coverage, but the farmers should receive benefits from whichever is higher in a given year. Could you comment on that for me, please, sir?
Yes, sir. In the 2014 Farm Bill, that decision was a one-time for the life of the Farm Bill decision, and it really stressed producers out trying to make that decision for the next 5 years, much less what's going to happen this year. The 2018 Farm Bill changed that and made it an annual decision after the first 2 years, and producers would have to decide on an annual basis which of those two products they wanted to go to. All I'm saying is take the decision away from them and allow them, if there was a benefit to be had, allow them to have the higher of the two. A lot of times they're both going to be negative, or I mean, not negative, but zero. And so, but they're good at farming and they don't want to make this decision, and they're really, it puts a lot of undue stress on them. Just give them whichever would be higher, and it can be scored that way.
Okay, my time has run out. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I now recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Outlaw, you may recall not long ago, back in March, we had this conversation about the state of the rice industry, and as the representative of the largest rice-producing district in the nation and largest rice-producing state in the nation, obviously I have some concerns about that, on how we know that, as you've talked about here, the Farm Safety Net, particularly PLC, isn't working well for rice producers under the current circumstances, and obviously, and we talked about this, we know we need to enhance that in the next Farm Bill. But you also mentioned during that hearing that, you said the rice industry was not doing well, that rice farmers are not seeing the increases in prices as other commodities are, but experiencing the same pressure with regard to input costs. I've done a little bit of math just since we've been sitting here, and I'm not a mathematician, but based on the conventional enterprise budget in Arkansas, cost per acre, roughly $554 per acre. Of that, 48% is fertilizer costs. Just fertilizer cost accounts for almost half of that enterprise budget. Average yield, 169 bushels an acre. You're a heck of a lot better at this than me, but those numbers look like they don't really pencil out well. Let me give you, you were working on a study for Senator Bozeman as well as Congresswoman Letlow. Can you give me an update on that and how those numbers are shaking out, if they've gotten worse?
Yes, sir. The testimony today included the analysis of the request from Senator Bozeman, and it showed that the only farms we have that really aren't going to cash flow this year are rice farms, and 2/3 of them will not cash flow. So we have 15, so you can do the math, that's 10 out of 15 will not cash flow. Certainly for other industries, that prices have risen, and it isn't a big concern. But for this industry in particular, there are a lot of reasons for that, which I would call trade distortions from other countries. There's a lot of reasons why rice is different, but certainly I would think that there would be cause for this body and the larger body to do something for rice starting this year.
And what would you suggest? Because, we can spitball about ideas that to help, crop specific. Rice is one of those that is kind of a staple item outside of the United States. So we rely and we look to foreign markets to move our rice. In fact, we're not one of the biggest rice producing nations in the world, yet we're in the top 5 in exports. Is that not true?
Yes.
So what do we do to enhance that? I mean, should we put a little more emphasis in our trade relationships with regard to rice? I know it's a sensitive area, particularly in Asia, but I mean, what would you suggest in the absence of, we're not going to reauthorize a farm bill today, but what could we do?
Well, certainly, holding other countries accountable to what they've agreed to do in trade negotiations is number one, and I think that there's a couple of particular we could talk about. But short of that, I would say that hopefully there would be a situation with some bill that was going to move this year that you could add some assistance targeted towards rice producers. I don't usually say those types of things, but this is completely different than for every other crop. And unless we want to lose producers, which basically rice has got a different infrastructure, we're going to lose that infrastructure, and unless we want to worry about doing that, then we need to provide some help relatively soon.
Relatively soon, and what type of help would we be talking about? Now, we mentioned in our last visit in this room, we talked about the potential for indexing production costs. When the Farm Bill in 2014 was implemented, we were basing that on 2012 figures, so we were already 2 years behind, but we made the mistake of not indexing those production costs. So now bringing that into 2020, you've seen a huge disparity in cost of production in the last several years. Is that an appropriate response?
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, as was stated earlier, we've spent a lot of money on CFAP and MFP for losses that were likely to happen that didn't actually materialize completely that we thought. And I'm telling you, these losses are going to happen. And so specifically the mechanism to do it, I think that you could use some of the formulas from CFAP in particular and adjust them and get some money to producers.
Thank you. I've run out of time, but I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and appreciate this hearing today. Obviously, it's timely because I had the folks with Farm Bureau in my office yesterday, livestock folks, and now we have a shortage of hay because of the drought. And so I don't know, every time we turn around, we've got another emergency. But Chairman Bustos and Ranking Member Scott, I thank you for holding this important hearing and to talk about these threats, particularly to our food supply. As we come closer to the time when Congress will write a new farm bill, it's important that we hear from all of you on how these programs are working for our farmers and what improvements need to be made. I believe that our main approach to writing a new farm bill should be a cautious one. The years since 2018, when the most recent farm bill was signed into law, have been so chaotic and unprecedented, not only from the overall economic picture in this country, for example, the war on fossil fuel, and now it appears there's a war on agriculture. We shouldn't make major changes to Title I and Title XI programs unless we are able to fully evaluate the potential consequences of those changes. Before turning to questions, I'll make one final comment. Though commodity prices are high right now, input prices are rising even faster rate, and of course we've heard that in your testimony. If my farmers have no way of protecting their margins, we could have another 1982 here, which was the last time that we had unprecedented inflation and a lot of guesswork on how so many surprises out there. And coming from the business community, surprises are a real problem. Dr. Outlaw, again, I thank you for your testimony. It's particularly timely when I'm hearing from all my farmers about the rising input of prices right now. Can you talk more about how we might better protect farmers and deal with this, all of these changes? Now, obviously, the war in Ukraine, we can all say, gosh, I wish we'd have done more to prevent that. Because now we're seeing the repercussions of it, and frankly, I don't know why the world's sitting around allowing one country to cause famine throughout the world. I mean, there ought to be repercussions for that, but at any rate, have you looked at any options as what we can do with the present situation?
Well, yes, sir. Our group has looked, over time, we have been asked by various members of Congress to look at indexing up the reference prices to more closely account the cost changes that their producers are dealing with. And so we have done that a lot of different times, and it is difficult to do, and it's difficult to do in real time because most of the official data we would get from USDA is lagged and things like that. But certainly it's worth looking at, again, specifically in this environment. Has been brought up a couple of times about margin protection for crop producers. That would include both the price side and the cost side. While it's complicated as anything we do, anything worth doing, the protection measures that we use is going to matter a lot as we go forward. So just because it's complicated or hard to do doesn't mean we shouldn't look at it.
Well, you know, from my economic experience, supply and demand is what guides everything. We know because of events around the world that demand's going up. And of course, I think the world is going to be looking at the United States to put forth every effort to make sure people aren't starving to death. That's going to require farmers to, for bigger yields, borrow more money, farm more acres, and so where, as far as demand, have you made any projections on what this thing could look like?
In particular, our group works with FAPRI out of the University of Missouri to do that side of the national and international price projections. But having done all this for 30 some odd years, like Joe said earlier, these prices are going to come down. We can't anticipate what's going to happen with the war stuff. That's the only reason why I would be sitting here saying I have no idea.
So how are prices going down if demand is exceeding supply?
One of the things that will happen we had high prices before Ukraine, and the reason why was because we had droughts around the world and other problems. Those are going to get satisfied a little bit, and then Ukraine won't be quite as a problem, I think.
Right. Okay. As far as a lack of agronomic inputs, a lot of my farmers have signed on to a petition dealing with that, and I'm about to run out of time, but the 2022 MPCI policy, could you comment on that proposal?
I'm not sure I heard exactly what you said, so I better not say that.
Farmers in my district have signed on to a petition which requests that a lack of agronomic inputs be included as covered peril under the 2022 MPCI policy. Can you comment on that?
I would say that.
Why don't we give you time to answer that later? The time's expired by more than a minute, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Thank you, Mr. Allen. I now would like to recognize Mr. Mann from the state of Kansas for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chairwoman, for allowing me to ask questions, and thank you for hosting this hearing. You know, President Eisenhower was from Kansas, grew up in my district, and he used to say that farming looks mighty easy when your plow is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from a cornfield. And there's a lot of truth in that. I think, we're having a lot of conversations about the input side, which is what we need to be talking about, the biggest issue facing the first district of Kansas today and moving forward. I think we've got to acknowledge that, to a large degree, this is self-inflicted, meaning this irrational war on fossil fuel is the basic reason we've seen these input prices increase. It's also self-inflicted because this war against our chemicals. And how modern-day agriculture works. This just makes no sense, the policies that we're pursuing. So that happens, and then things come along that may or may not be within our control, like Ukraine, that just exacerbates the problem. So I think we got to acknowledge that. We all know this crop insurance is absolutely vital, and it does two things. It benefits farmers, but it also benefits Americans because we've never had to rely on another country for our food supply. We get that wrong. The whole world looks entirely different. Certainly, our country looks different. And I know we've talked a little bit about this, but for you specifically, Dr. Outlaw, given the ability to make some changes to crop insurance this year, and I think we need to use a scalpel and not a sledgehammer, but what specific changes would you make, would you advise that we consider making to the crop insurance program in this next Farm Bill?
Really, I don't have very many changes other than there's a situation right now with basically back on the ethanol situation, the USDA capped the A&O for agents, and that has caused a problem with providing insurance policies to the specialty crops. And that to me is one of those things. I'm not an expert on it, but I've been reading about it, and it's one of those things that needs to be adjusted sooner rather than later. In terms of the rest of the crop insurance products, obviously, we've got a really good system in place where new policies can be developed, and the government helps policies be developed and paying for the cost, which will make it more likely. So I really can't say that there's anything else that really needs to be looked into for crop insurance other than that A&O issue that, again, I'm not the expert on, but I know it's out there.
Okay. Based on recent drought monitoring indexes in Kansas, we have some areas that are 10 to 15 inches behind annual rainfall this year. So areas of the country, certainly severe drought, which is leading to less forage, less hay, less ability to feed for our livestock producers who also are facing record inputs. Question for you, Dr. Rainey. Can you speak more to the value of the current risk management products available to our livestock producers?
I think that they've been enhanced recently. I still think that there is, as farmers learn of these products, I think there's opportunities for technical assistance to help enhance the understanding and how to use those products more effectively. I think if you're going back, you were talking about in general crop insurance, I think that the metric is protection to the farmers and ranchers. And as we look, and sometimes we can look and see whether a product is being used or not, and actually just do some follow-up and feedback to get some feedback on why products aren't being used. And sometimes that's the indicator of that lack of understanding or additional work being needed to change some of the parameters of the program.
Great.
And so I think that especially, I've heard a lot of success stories from a lot of our livestock farmers in terms of the forage, in terms of drought products that have been advanced, that are really helpful as we see this enhanced issues with climate variability.
Yeah, thank you. Lastly, I just say, while we're discussing these tools available to farmers and ranchers across the country, I think we also have to take a moment to discuss the impact of some of the administration's proposed changes to the tax code. Specifically, President Biden's most recent budget once again included eliminating the stepped-up basis. It also includes imposing capital gains taxes on farms, ranchers, and businesses that have been held in a family for over 90 years or more. I'm calling this the farm killer tax because it would destroy the livelihood of producers across the country. Dr. Outlaw, my last question would be for you. Have you examined the impact of changes to the tax code would have on farms and ranches, and can you expand on what an elimination of the stepped-up basis or the new farm killer tax would mean for farm country?
Yes, sir. We actually did a study at the request of Ranking Member Thompson and Senator Bozeman last year that across all of our 94 farms, 98% of them would be affected by elimination of stepped-up basis at an average cost of $750,000 extra in tax.
Yeah, once again, in my view, stepped up, or this would be, self-inflicted nonsense, and we got to make sure we don't let that happen to our ag producers. So thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I now recognize Mr. Rouser from the state of North Carolina for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate our witnesses being here today very much. Energy and food are both critical to our national security, and not just that, everybody's survival. Basic survival. I certainly don't mean to be pessimistic, but I think the next several years are going to be pretty challenging. I don't see inflation going anywhere for the next several years. Interest rates are going to be a lot higher. Much higher input costs are going to be with us for some time. And a subject I want to explore a little bit that really hadn't been discussed today in terms of the direct payment that was put in place in the 2002 Farm Bill for our program crops. If you look at that period of time, 2002 to 2014, of course, not all things are comparing apples to apples necessarily, but we didn't have as much ad hoc assistance. Again, not all things are equal. but I do think that's notable. What are the pros and cons to reinstituting that? One of the nice things about it was WTO compliant. It was simple. It was easy. When we did have ad hoc disaster assistance payments, it was easy to piggyback on. Again, everything has its pros and cons. But just curious from the panel, if you can discuss, your thoughts on that. Maybe now is a good time to reinstitute that, given the input costs that are going to continue to be exceptionally high. And it's simple, it's easy, as compared to some of these other alternatives. Any thoughts on that? Dr. Outlaw, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. I've studied this my whole career, and really there was nothing at all wrong. The producers liked the direct payments. Became a lot of different names for these payments, but they started off as PFC payments, and that changed over time. But really what happened was that we had a series of good years in agriculture, and they were very hard to defend, giving payments to producers when they didn't need them, and didn't need them. And so people were thinking about this, going to a situation, and it was brought up a number of different times by different people on, could you trigger it? Could a trigger be put in place so the fixed payment comes if things are needed, and that doesn't happen if it doesn't trigger again? That makes it kind of a counter-cyclical payment, but at least it's a fixed amount the producer would know they were going to get. It's been looked at a lot of different ways, but I don't want to take all the time, but in my opinion, the public opinion of giving producers money when things got good is what ended that program.
Sure. Well, obviously we're in a different environment now, so ground might be a little more fertile. Any other comment or thoughts?
I think it just speaks to the issue of targeting that I mentioned in my testimony, the idea that the demand for assistance tends to be greater at different times, and the demand from producers for assistance is stronger in certain times than others. And if you provide payments in times when that demand is low, that's not going to achieve the policy objectives that we want, which is to keep farmers going through those tough times.
Any other comment from any other panelist?
I guess, Congressman, in the material I presented, the ARC PLC payments remained relatively flat through the last 5-6 years. In fact, it's down in 2021. The direct payments wouldn't react to the kind of situation we've seen the last 3 or 4 years. And the ad hoc payments have certainly been the thing that have helped producers in this period. And I'm not sure a direct payment would react quick enough.
Okay. Any other thoughts? One quick last thing. There's one thing worse than high input cost, and that is no inputs. I'm concerned about the availability of fertilizer, as we move forward. Any thoughts on that, or any insight that you all might be able to provide on that front? Any projections?
If you read the press as much as the rest of us have to, you'd feel a little bit encouraged that they're going to get the bottlenecks figured out. But certainly, the industry has a lot of questions that somebody needs to ask.
My time's expired. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. I now would like to recognize Mr. Baird from Indiana, who's on with us virtually for the next 5 minutes. Mr. Baird, your camera is off. Oh, it looks like maybe it's on now. If you can unmute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate the committee. I appreciate this hearing, and I always learn something. So I was really just listening in to hear all the comments, and I think the Farm Bill is so important to the rural communities like my district in West Central Indiana. So I really appreciate the expertise that you have with the committee and the witnesses today. So thank you very much, and I'll yield back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baird. So before we adjourn today, everybody's had a chance to ask questions. I would invite the ranking member to share any closing comments that he may have. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank the people who testified before the committee today. I mean, your input will be key to us as we write the next farm bill. About 90% of the ag production in this country comes from around 12% of the farms. And whether you're a big farmer or a small farmer, the dollars in and the dollars out have to yield to positive revenue or you're not going to be in business. And this is not about every individual farm inside the United States. It's about domestic agricultural production and making sure that Americans aren't dependent on foreign sources of food. And it has everything to do with our independence as a country. And working through the next farm bill and how we handle crop insurance and disaster payments is key to making sure that we're able to keep our domestic ag production afloat during these hard times. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you, Chairwoman, for having the committee. I think it's been a good hearing, and I look forward to continuing this discussion as we mark up the next farm bill.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Thompson, as the ranking member of our full committee, would you like to make any closing comments?
No, I know votes are coming up here soon, so I just want to say thank you for your leadership and the ranking member's leadership on this. Incredibly important. We're farming, as I said before, agriculture is a business, and at the end of the day, it's a margin. And these are some challenging times based on the testimony we've heard and the things that we're hearing at home too. And it's just great to have these four economists as a part of our farm team to be able to lean on and to get your input. And we will continue to lean on all four of you. So thank you so much for being here and participating today.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And I want to thank our members for participating today and also our witnesses. We're grateful to you. You shed some light on what's going on out on the countryside, and that's very helpful to us as we gear up to figure out what's going to go into the 2023 Farm Bill. So we're really grateful to you for your time. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management is adjourned.